Hey, lovely people. Welcome back to another episode of Living with Purpose. My name is Queen, and if you're new to my channel, I film about faith, food, and public health. And also, if you want to join the family, subscribe, hit the bell so that you don't miss out on another episode. Today, I'm so excited because we have a special guest who will be telling us about her journey to motherhood, her pregnancy, journey as well. So I'm just so excited. We have Hannah, and I'm going to be introducing her. So Hannah is a newlywed and new mother. She is a college counselor who enjoys empowering others to pursue their educational and career aspirations. And she is a lifelong learner, always seeking opportunities to grow and explore various passions. Thank you so much, Hannah, Sister Hannah, for being here today.
You are welcome, and you're welcome to call me Hannah.
So we're going to start off with the first question. When did you know you wanted to be a mother?
Okay, very good question. So for me, I always knew that I wanted to be a mother from the get-go. I knew I wanted to get married and become a mother. So I was not scared of motherhood. And, so when the time came, I knew I wanted to be a mother.
Cool. So just from the jump, you're like, I wanted to be a mother right after marriage. That's awesome. And I just thank God that He blessed you, with the
Yes,
first child.
yes, yes.
And so, can you tell us a little bit about when you found out you were pregnant?
Okay, so it was really interesting because when I found out, I did not have the regular and typical symptoms that you have when you're pregnant. So I didn't have the morning sickness. I didn't have any symptoms to indicate that I was pregnant. So I did notice that I missed maybe my first and second period, and I was like, okay, I might be pregnant, but then I'm not sure. So I was okay, and I hadn't had my period, missed 2 times. And then all of a sudden, my period started again, and I was like, okay, I thought I was pregnant, but I guess not. And this was the time where I was like, you know what, I need to like go see the doctor to confirm whether I was. So when I went to the doctor, I'm telling the doctor, like, hey, I just want to confirm whether I was pregnant or not. I took the pregnancy test and I only saw one line, so I'm not sure. So I just want to make sure. And, I did the testing and everything, and the doctor came back and was like, guess what? You're pregnant. And I
Wow.
was really happy about that and really thankful that I was still pregnant, and that God was still gracious throughout the process and I was still pregnant. And the reason why I say that I was still pregnant, I'm probably going to just talk more about it as we progress through the interview because through it all, I think God was just miraculous in the process and just really gracious.
Definitely. And so, how would you describe your pregnancy? Like, take us on that journey.
Okay, so it's very interesting. As I mentioned earlier, I knew on the get-go that I wanted to be a mother once, I got married, and God was gracious to do that. So, like, just like my pregnancy journey was really interesting. As I mentioned earlier, there were some things that happened where, can create some fear and can create some doubts, but God was just still gracious throughout. And one of the funny things is that when you're 35 or 35 plus, you're considered a geriatric pregnancy.
Mhm.
Which
I
is
didn't know
really,
that.
yeah, it's really interesting because I'm like, what? Like
Hmm.
I'm considered that. I thought, geriatric would start from like when you're in your 60s. So it's very interesting that in the States, they would consider you, geriatric if you're 35 and plus. And when you look into that, you start seeing some really scary things like, oh, miscarriages, or that there's a potential that pregnancy would not be full term. And, it's so easy to access things on Google now, and you it's so easy to find yourself like Googling. And I found myself doing that. And I was just like, you know what, I probably need to like slow this down so I'm not having like more anxiety or fear about being, a certain age and being considered a geriatric, pregnancy. So in addition to being considered that, as I mentioned earlier, there were some things that they found out during the pregnancy. So a lot of my pregnancy was like really depending on God and really just trusting Him through the process. So the thing is, like, my pregnancy was going well, and everything was going well. But then it's very interesting because at some point during the pregnancy, I just woke up one night and I was in pain, and thank God for my husband. He was like, okay, maybe we should go to the hospital. And if he hadn't said that, I was thinking of like just, being superwoman and just like, pushing through the pain and everything. But, we got to the hospital, and during that visit, I was waiting for the results. I was in pain, and they did the testing and everything. We're waiting. And one of the things that they found out was that, I had fibroids. So in addition to like being considered geriatrics, and now they're telling you that you have fibroids. And I was like, what? I didn't know that I had fibroids because I did not have the typical, once again, I didn't have the typical symptoms that are associated with someone with having fibroids. So God had been gracious, with me throughout my life, I guess. And now during the pregnancy, and what they found out, like the doctor was like, wow, it's such a, you're so lucky that you're still pregnant. And I was like, wow, why? And one of the things they pointed out was that the fibroids were big, one being the size of a bowling ball and another being the size of a grapefruit, so like just like thinking about, and now I'm pregnant with it, and now I'm considered high risk, pregnancy. So God was just like really gracious throughout the pregnancy. And I was just like, thanking God and just praising Him and really trusting Him through the process. Because now there was a situation in place where I'm pregnant, and now there are fibroids, and now, the concerns that come with having fibroids, and making sure that, the fibroids don't take life away from like the baby or anything like that. So that's how my pregnancy that's what my pregnancy pretty much consisted of. Like, despite the fact that God was gracious enough that the pregnancy was going well, I had to also think about the fibroid, but overall, I keep mentioning this. God was gracious. He was faithful. And I just trusted Him through. I'm like, hey, God, you brought this life, you put this life in me, and I trust that what you started, you are going to finish, So I would just say the pregnancy went well with God on my side.
What were some of your expectations that you had about pregnancy, and what was the reality for you? Do you want to share
Right.
some?
So I did not go into it with expectations.
Yeah, I think that's
And
good.
part of the reason why is because I really think that sometimes when you have certain expectations, and if they don't work out that way, you end up being really disappointed, and it really disrupts you from actually truly enjoying the process. So it was really important for me to go into it without expecting like, oh, I'm going to do this, I'm going to be this way, I'm going to be this superwoman, that does all these things. I didn't want to, because the reality is that when that happens, you can end up being really disappointed. And I think sometimes, like, sometimes it's so easy to set ourselves up as women. We have these expectations. It could be like, oh, my dream man is going to be this way and he's going to do all these things, or like, I'm going to accomplish all these things in life. And when those things don't happen, what
Mm,
you end up being very disappointed, can lead to depression, or you end up being really angry and
mm,
snapping at people and not being a gracious and kind person. So I made sure that going into the pregnancy, I didn't set myself up for expectation. What I asked for was like, Lord, I want to enjoy this pregnancy. There's a reason why you've created this thing in the first place, like women being able to give birth, by your grace. So help me to enjoy it despite all this, news that I'm hearing, despite, all the possible challenges. Help me to enjoy the process.
mm.
And God was faithful throughout. So I think as women, it's very important that we're careful about setting certain expectations, because what if it doesn't go as we planned? What happens? You know?
Very true. Yeah, because if you have expectations are not met, you'll be disappointed and you might most likely miss the blessing that is there, you know,
Right, exactly.
point. And so so during your pregnancy, did you take any classes, do any exercises or declarations or prayers? I know that's a mouthful, but
But it's a really good question. um, so during the pregnancy, I do think I didn't take official classes, but I did sign up for some courses online, because I think as women, it's very important to be informed. Pregnancy is it's an interesting thing that happens. It's a big thing that happens in your life, and there are changes that your body goes through. So it's really important for you as a woman to be informed.
Mm,
I think that is so important. And one of the things that I wanted was, I didn't necessarily want medical interventions
okay.
in my pregnancy. So I wanted to be equipped. I wanted to be informed on what I could do to make this pregnancy, um, with God's help, a good pregnancy. So you start realizing like there are certain foods that you can eat that
Mhm,
can help you even with like morning sickness, like the nausea that you're feeling. There are certain exercises that you can do that can help you with the discomforts that you might feel in your body. So I was making sure that I was staying informed. And there are certain things, like maybe certain teas that are safe for you, like herbal teas that you can take that will probably make the laboring, that will help with the laboring process
mm,
you know so I wanted to be informed, because one of the things is like I didn't necessarily want to take like an epidural
mhm,
or pitocin. And part of the reason why was because I didn't want my laboring to be long. you know um you hear a lot of stories of like labor being for 3 days,
Emma?
being for many, many hours, and it was excruciating. And when you hear that, what ends up happening is that a lot of women end up saying, like, you know what, I don't want to get pregnant. I don't want to have kids.
Wow.
It's a painful process. I don't want to go through that. And you don't necessarily see the beauty of and the miracle of
Yeah.
like a child growing inside of you and being able to like, and God helping you to birth that child, and you're like, what? That whole human being with arms, like came out of me. Things like that. So I wanted to make sure that I did whatever I could to minimize medical intervention. When I heard that my mom going through labor for like 2 hours, like
Yeah.
3 hours, I'm like, Lord, bless me with that by your grace. May that be the case, you know?
Definitely.
And the thing is like, and not to, some women can't help it.
Of
You know,
course.
like, you know, there's some things that lead to them having, causing them to have like long labors and really painful pregnancy or uncomfortable pregnancy. But then the thing as I think I like to encourage women, like you can be empowered. You know, like there's some things that you might be able to do with God's help that would ease your pregnancy a little bit. You know, maybe not completely and perfectly, but better than if you didn't do anything at all. So I did just a little, you know, some exercises like walking really helps, you know, exercise ball, like, you know, sitting and bouncing on that really helps you with your pelvic bone, you know. You know, there's certain exercises, eating certain foods, taking your vitamins, you know, knowing the difference between folic acid and folate acid.
Wow.
You know, folate acid is what you should take as a woman who is pregnant, not the synthetic folic acid. You know, like, so you learn all of these things, and it really does help with your pregnancy. Um, Making sure that you're taking all the vitamins. Vitamin D is really important.
Mhm.
Your iron level is really important because you find out that a lot of women, when they're pregnant, they end up being anemic during the pregnancy. So it's really important that your iron level is up, so it's enough for you and also enough for the baby. So you learn like all these different things, and I think as women we need to be informed. So those were the types of courses that I took online, you know, easily accessible, that really helped me throughout the pregnancy.
Wow. Staying informed. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
because information is honestly power. Um,
Yes.
so, is there like any tip, because we're going to move into like your laboring process, but is there any tip you would give to someone that is pregnant for the first time? Like what's like one pearl of wisdom you would give them?
Um, I think it's important to really connect with other women.
Mm,
You know, it's important to connect with women who have gone through the process, encouraging women and women who are also honest, you know. Um, I don't think as women we talk about this enough, you know,
mm,
like how um, such a miracle, how it's such a blessing to be a mother, you know? And I'm not necessarily talking about like the sugar coating, like, oh yeah, everything was perfect, you
mhm.
know? Or the other end, like everything was horrible. Who wants to do this again? But having like you know, different perspective, different experiences, and feeling empowered as a woman, you know, I think what really helped me was like knowing that there were some women, like at least a couple of women I could ask
Right.
in my circle sphere of influence, where I can, because of what process they went through. Like since for instance, I wanted minimal medical intervention,
Yeah.
so I was able to connect with another woman who didn't have medical intervention.
Wow.
So I was able to ask her, like, so what did you do? How was the laboring process? Like, what are some tips that you have for me? You know, being a first time, because this process can be really scary because there's so many things that are uncertain. And she gave me some really great tips, recommendations of books I could read. And she was really encouraged, like, don't even stress yourself. Like, don't worry, you're doing fine. You know, just incorporate these few things, you know, eat certain foods, you know, like don't take too much carbs, you know, because it
Mm,
does have an effect on you. But then don't cut out carbs completely because you also need that for energy, you know,
mhm.
so just different things. And that right there, would be like one of the, I feel like that's the best recommendation I could give, like for first time mothers. We need to connect with other mothers and other women and make this more of a positive experience.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well said. Well said. I'm like taking notes in my head.
Mhm.
um, so fast forward to giving birth. What was your initial experience when the pandemic hit, and what adjustments did you have to make?
Okay.
Yeah.
So I mean, truth be told, the pandemic has been crazy for everyone. And it can be really scary because there's so many things that you hear. I heard some things where maybe I read somewhere where someone was like, they wouldn't even let my husband come in, or I had to wear a mask while laboring. And I'm like, how do you wear a mask while going into labor?
Wow.
Like, I want to be able to breathe.
Yeah.
I was thinking,
You're trying to breathe. Push, breathe.
right.
Okay.
I was thinking about those things like, wait a minute, how is this going to work out? But at the end of it, I was like, Lord, help us through this process. And I think what also helped was asking the hospital, like,
Mm,
okay, what is it, what are you doing during this pandemic
yeah.
for pregnant women and they're giving birth? So what's the process? So, and I think having an idea of what that is ahead of time really prepares you,
Mm,
mentally. So I was, grateful to get some of the information that I wanted, that I felt like I needed in order for me to properly prepare for giving birth during the pandemic.
wow. Great. And so, did you have a birth plan? And if you did, how did you change it? Because
Hmm. Yeah, so my birth plan, as I mentioned earlier, I wanted to limit the level of how much medical intervention. I wanted to minimize that as much as I possibly could. So there was a birth course that I took online. They have like a really basic birth plan, and I think it's really good to have an idea of what constitutes a birth plan. Because
mm,
prior to that, I had no clue. I was like, what? People actually have plans for birth?
mm,
Really? How does that work? You know?
yeah.
So it was really helpful to have like some sort of like template and see what you could read on the different things and see what you would prefer,
Mhm,
and what you wouldn't want. So there were some things, there are certain things that maybe they give the baby like a antibiotics, or vitamin K, or just different things that you have to be aware of. So having an idea of what those things were really helped me a lot, because I was able to like do research and then select what I wanted on the birth plan, so that I'm not surprised once I start birthing and they start saying, oh, here's the epidural, here's the pitocin, it's really going to help you, or here's all this stuff, you have to like take your vaccines now, and you're like, what's going on? Okay, okay,
yeah.
okay, I have no choice, here's
Exactly.
C-section. You're like, wait a minute, really?
What?
Because C-sections are, they're faster, and it's also cost more for the doctors. And the thing is, like, sometimes there are some hospitals where they have a higher rate of C-sections compared to like maybe a natural birth. So I think this are important information, to really find out prior to, like, whatever hospital you're going to, like finding out like the statistics of like, okay, how many C-sections do they have compared to like natural birthing, you know so I was really blessed to like go to a hospital where they're like, yeah, we really, support natural birthing, like this is yeah, we encourage that the woman, be able to do that. And so though the birth plan was something that I constantly had in front of me and I had to like pay attention to. And I was like, what is it? I was building as the pregnancy went along, because one of the things that they said, because of the fibroids, they were like, okay, you might have to have like a C-section. I'm like, hold up. Like, slow down, hold up, slow down, wait, like, are we sure, so, and I'm glad I was able to ask this question, because usually it's very easy to be tired to and relax when you have like a doctor giving you information. You're like, they're the experts,
Mm.
and I'm just a patient, so they know more than me. So when my doctor was like, you might need to have a C-section, I was like, okay, so is that the only option? Like, is there a way where it can be natural, And I was glad to ask that question, because then my doctor was able to like look and was like, okay, looks like the pathway is clear, you know. So yeah, you can have this baby naturally, and everything. I was like, oh, okay, Lord, thank you, And from there, once I got that information, I started praying, like, Lord, let the pathway be clear, so that I can have this baby in a natural way. And part of the reason was because the recovery time for a C-section compared to natural is longer. And I was like, I don't think I want to be in that discomfort or that pain for 6 weeks or more, you know? So God was gracious enough to allow me to actually not have to go through a C-section, but to go through a natural birthing. And I think the birth plan that I was able to find really kept me informed. It
Mm.
helped a lot.
That is awesome. Yeah. So just from what you're saying, be informed and ask questions. Don't just accept, what
Yeah,
your doctor says as fact and truth. Ask
right.
questions because there could be alternatives to what they're saying. Yeah. So
Yes,
that's
exactly.
awesome. Hmm.
Yeah.
And so, what was your experience giving birth during the pandemic or just in general? Because, you know, what was your experience?
All right. So
Oh,
I was blessed to have my husband there. We could only have one person in the room, and so that was fantastic. And he was just very supportive throughout.
good.
Um, so um, so I gave birth at 39 weeks as
Okay.
opposed to like 40,
Mhm.
so a week prior to anticipated, due date, expected due date.
Yeah.
Um, so baby was ready. And I think I was like busy doing my hair and getting ready, like, okay, you want to look at least decent enough when
Yeah.
when you're birthing and everything. So I had been feeling constipated.
Oh, okay.
TMI. We're talking about motherhood, we're
No,
talking about,
TMI. People need to know.
I know,
I
we're
need to know.
talking about birthing. So there's some information that I'm going to provide because I think it's very important that we women know,
Thank you.
right?
Yes.
So I'm feeling cramp. I'm feeling some sort of constipation. I had been feeling it, off and on. And since it was my first time being pregnant, I'm like, I don't know what contractions feel like.
Hmm.
All I know, I don't know, and I'm like, what do they feel like? I have no clue, first time pregnancy. So I had been feeling, constipated. I'm like, oh gosh, it must have been something that I ate, because, and the thing is, like, I had challenges with like constipation
Okay.
prior to getting pregnant. So
Mm.
one of the things I was like, Lord, let this not make it harder, and everything, because you don't want to be constipated while you're pregnant, So I'm like experiencing this, and I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna, use the bathroom, and everything is, fine. So I think like couple of days before, like I felt constipated. And I'm like, gosh, it must have been the spaghetti that I ate, maybe. And I'm like, Lord, forgive me for eating. You start saying all your prayers when you're going through certain
That
things,
was
and
one of
you're
your
like,
cravings, wasn't it? Right? I remember.
yes, I love spaghetti. And it's not like my cravings were like crazy, like I want that chicken over there, but there were things that I usually like, but spaghetti was like really good. Was my favorite, definitely. So I'm like having my spaghetti and everything. I'm like, oh gosh, could it be because of the spaghetti that I ate that I'm feeling this constipation that it's not going away. So like the night before, it was like a long stretch. I'm like, oh my gosh, this constipation. What is going on? And I'm like, okay, this needs to go away. So at some point, I'm like, oh, Lord, praying like, Lord, help me with this constipation, help me, uh, all of that. So in the morning, everything is fine. I use the bathroom a little bit, throughout the night and everything. So in the morning, it's Saturday morning, and I'm like doing my hair, talking on the phone, and everything, getting ready, still feeling some sort of constipation, but the spaghetti was still tempting. So I still ate a little bit more. I'm like, this shouldn't hurt me, right? Right. So I'm like, and I'm feeling that constipation. I'm like, oh, okay, I have to like go to the bathroom,
Mm.
right? So this time, like, okay, we're gonna really go, like, whatever, by force. Constipation, you need to be taken care of. So I'm like, there, and I sit, and I was able to, like, I got some relief. And then after that, I felt something.
Oh, wow.
I felt something. I was like, oh gosh, I feel like something is slipping out or coming, along. And, I called my husband. I was like, hey, babe, I think you need to come home. I don't know. I might need to like go to the hospital, like, because something is coming out, and I hope it's not the baby, because I don't know. So
Oh my God.
thankfully, when I called him, he was by the door.
Thank God.
And I'm like, wow, Lord, you're so gracious. He was by the door, and he walks. He was like, what's going on? I was like, I don't know. Something is like coming. I don't know. Maybe it's the baby and everything. He was like, okay, let's go. I called the hospital. I'm like, should I? Something is coming. I don't know. Maybe it's the baby, its head. I'm feeling something there. I'm not sure. I'm a first time mother. This is my first time going through this. And then the lady was like, so maybe you should call, the ambulance. I'm like, okay, maybe I can call and everything. So I'm like in the process of calling the ambulance. And then my husband was like, wait, are you in pain or anything? I was like, no. And he was like, okay, so maybe we can drive to the hospital. So I was like, okay. So we're like, we're able to like drive to the hospital. It's like 25 minutes away. And I'm like, okay. And I'm sitting in the most unusual way because I'm like, I don't want to sit on whatever that thing is,
Oh my
I
God.
know. So here I am, like, coming, we're driving, and it's like coming out, and more, and I'm like, oh, we need to like get to the hospital, and everything. And then at some point I started feeling the water trickle down. I'm like, oh, I guess that's water breaking, in the car. And I'm like, okay, we're almost there at the hospital. So we got to the hospital, thank God. And they wheel me. I thought I needed to be on a stretcher, but no, they brought out a wheelchair. So I'm sitting, and then they take me to the room, delivery room, and then you know get on the change. I get on the bed, and then it turns out I was 6 centimeter dilated already. And what was actually coming out was what seemed like the water bag. Like I'm like, oh wow, so here. I am in the hospital. I'm 6 centimeter dilated. And I was like, oh, great. Because one of the things is that if you're 1 centimeter dilated, 2 centimeter dilated, and
Yeah.
it's not far enough, the doctors can send you back because
Yeah.
you're like, okay, you need to do more laboring at home. So thank God I didn't have to go back. I was already 6 centimeters. And the doctors were like, the nurses were like, wow, so wait, so you're 6 centimeter, are you in pain? I'm like, oh, not really. I'm not in pain. I'm like, I'm not in pain. It's like, they're like, oh wow, this is really unusual because people usually come in and they're screaming this. I was like, really? And then they were like, so when did you start contracting? I was like, I don't know. I was like, what do contractions feel like? And
Wow.
then they were like, I don't, you just feel, the Braxton Hicks, all of that. I'm like, I don't know what those things are. Like, I wasn't feeling that. All I know is that I was feeling constipated, that's it. And then they were like, oh, okay. So 6 centimeter dilated, and then now I'm at the hospital, and then the laboring is contractions progressing, and then I think at 8 centimeters or so, I started feeling or 8 centimeters, I started feeling like, oh, okay, so, ooh, I'm feeling something here, like I'm feeling these contractions and all of that. And thank God for my husband, he was there to fan me because I'm like, it is so hot, but it was cool in the hospital. I'm like, I'm feeling hot. Stop continue fanning me, So thank God, like there were I kept asking the nurse, like, so when do I know to push? They were like, you feel it, she's describing it, like you feel it down there and you just do that. And I'm like, I guess. So anyway, like it progresses. And I think thank God, I got to 9 centimeter dilated, continued on. And one of the things is that it's not just dilation you have to think of during pregnancy. You also have to think of your cervix being
Mm.
effaced. So effaced meaning melting so that the baby can easily come out. So there's dilation and then there's effacing as well.
Wow.
So if I hadn't done research, I wouldn't have known about the effacing part. So when the nurse was like, okay, you're a 9 centimeter dilated, and then there's 10% phasing that you still need to get out of the way. And I'm like, okay, all of that. So at some point, I was fully dilated. The nurse did something with my cervix. Now I'm fully phased. And now I feel the urge to like push. I'm like, oh, is this what you're talking? I'm like, I feel like I'm ready to push.
Wow. Oh my
So
God.
I pushed, and yeah, the baby's head came, and I think it was like maybe 4 pushes or so.
Hmm.
Um, the baby was out, a healthy baby.
Praise
Thank God. So in total, I was in the hospital for 3 hours or so, 3.5 hours, like during that process.
Wow. Wow.
Mhm.
As I said before, I tap into that anointing in Jesus' name.
Amen. Amen.
Oh
There's
wow,
nothing wrong with that.
that is amazing. Wow.
Yes.
And you didn't even feel like the pain that people describe. You were just like, I don't know what's happening, but I know something's coming out. And
Right.
you're
Yeah.
dilated, and oh my God, that's
Mhm.
awesome testimony. And
Yes.
yeah, I tap into that.
Amen. And so it turns out like the constipation that I was feeling were my contractions.
Wow.
So I was like, oh. It is
Wow.
different for people, but mine felt like I was constipated and I needed to use the bathroom, you know, but I was actually contracting, you know. So, and it wasn't excruciating pain. It was just like, oh, what is this constipation, you know? So,
Oh, that's awesome. That's good for people to hear because I didn't
mhm,
know that you could feel constipated and it's actually you're contracting. So that's
right,
awesome.
exactly.
How is it being a new mom?
I would say it's been a blessing, but it's also been a learning process.
Mm,
And I think as mothers, new mothers, and as women, we need to give ourselves permission to learn, you know? Because I think it's very easy to think like, oh, this comes naturally for me as a woman. So therefore, everything should be automatic. I should already be in tune with my baby. I should already have this figured out. Like my baby shouldn't even be crying at all, you know? You're thinking of all these things, but find out that um, there are lots of things to learn, and you have to be patient with yourself and enjoy the process and ask God to really help you through the process, you know, because it can be challenging.
yeah. Wow, it's true. And so, what is one thing you wish you knew before you became a mother?
Mm, I, hmm. I think because I think once again it's like allowing yourself to learn, you know, and not being so hard on yourself. Like I think understanding that you don't have to know everything. You know, you
Mm,
don't have to have it all figured out. I wish, you know, I knew that initially. So it allows you to be more gracious and with yourself, you know. And the thing is that sometimes you're not, when you when you're not patient with yourself, you can let it out on the baby, and you don't want that to happen. Because you're like, how come you're not working according to my plan? You know, I'm doing all the baby tricks that I know, like yeah, whatever it is. And why is it that you're not responding? The thing is, like, every baby, every child, every baby is different, you know? And I think the thing is, I thought I was a really patient person, but honestly, like, motherhood makes you realize that you need to be more patient.
mm,
And it causes you to, like, rely on God because this is a life that He's entrusted you with, you know, and you want to do the best that you possibly can to raise this child in the way of the Lord. And it's not something that you can actually do on your own and
mm,
say, okay, if I do this Bible study every Tuesday night, or you have all these different formulas. It's God giving you wisdom, you being sensitive to the Holy Spirit, and
mm.
God guiding you through the process. And in order for that to happen, you have to allow Him to actually guide you through the process. So you're in that position of like, I need all the help that I can get, Lord, because I don't have the answers.
Wow, very well said. And so, one of my second to last questions. So, how does faith and your purpose in life play a role in being a mother for you?
Uh, mhm. Faith, I think motherhood is a privilege
Mm,
and it is a blessing. So, when God blesses you with the opportunity to be a mother, you know, it's like He's entrusted you, as I mentioned earlier, He's entrusted you with the life, you know, and now it's like raise this child in the way of the Lord. You know, like raise this child to like love me, raise this child to come to a point where they're like, Lord, I need you. You know, I surrender to you, be the Lord of my life, you know,
mm,
and where they come to a point of salvation, you know. So I feel like, motherhood should be embraced because this is part of God's design. You know, you get married and you have children, you know, and yes, it's true that it doesn't always work out that way, but when God blesses you with that, it is such a privilege and an honor to be involved in the process of raising a child, you know, raising a person to come to know Him as Lord and Savior.
Wow. Yeah, just very, very well said. So, your last piece of advice, what advice, because you already gave great advice and pearls of wisdom, but what advice would you give to someone that is a new mother to be during the pandemic? You know, there's fear, there's all of this anxiety that's associated with motherhood in general, but added with the pandemic, what advice would you give since you have gone through it?
hmm I think it's really important. I mentioned it earlier. Connect with other women. Connect with women you trust. You know, um, and and when I say that, like you're not necessarily looking for someone who is a super mom and has all the answers, but someone that can support you through the way. Someone that can pray with you. Someone that you can, and when I say that, like, because fear is real, and it helps. Sometimes when you're in the midst of that fear, you're not able to pray the way that you need to. So it helps when you can say to like maybe your spouse and say, "Ah, I'm feeling this way, can we just pray about it like right now?" Or if not your spouse, I think it's really important to have other women, to say, okay, can you can you pray with me about this, and sometimes you might not even need to ask, they just know, they're like, okay, I'm gonna pray about it because based on what you're talking about, I'm just gonna pray for you about it, and you're like, thank you. And you have to like break it down, and you were able to like sense that. So I think it's really important to like be connected with other encouraging women, and also to see this as a beautiful thing, you know it is to see the design that God has in place. And I think what also helped me through the process is because you're going through all these changes in your body. You're a first time mom, you're anxious, you're fearful, you're thinking about things, the news out there, if you continue listening to that, it only creates more fear. So when I found myself feeling in that way, I went back to the word.
Mm,
So very easy. I was like, okay, Lord, what is your design? you
mhm,
know okay, I'm feeling this way, what do you say about this? Like my body is going through this motherhood thing, like going through these changes, like, okay, what does your word say about being a mother? What are other women in the Bible that have actually, what was their testimony? And yes, okay, it's true, that was like maybe hundreds and hundreds of years ago or whatever. But guess what? The experience is the same. God did something in their lives. So, like, God can do something in your life and more, So, connecting with other women and also making sure that you understand and you're connected to God's design, and God's purpose for this help you embrace, and enjoy the process better.
wow. Wow. Well said. Um, this session was amazing. I definitely was taking so many notes in my head. Thank you so much, Hannah, for your time and just for pouring out and just being transparent with us because it's true. We need to know what's going on with motherhood and the journey. And I'm glad you're able to share your story with us, on this platform. So if anyone is interested in, reaching out to Hannah, her information, her email and Instagram handle will be in the description below. Definitely check it out. She's a very sweet and kind person. So I'm just excited that she's here and that you all are able to, experience a piece of, who she is. So thank you so much, everyone, for watching. If you're new to my channel, definitely subscribe so that you will not miss out on another episode of Living with Purpose. Thank you so much. God's blessings always. Take care.